people's lives. It affects entire communities. And so, from my standpoint, I want to make it clear. As long as I have a breath in me, and you should make the commitment as well, I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change. I am going to continue to fight to change.
Alrighty then. Apparently something is playing in my background and I don't know where it is. Yeah, this is fun. Hang on just a second and we will get it straightened out. It will be some tab that unmuted in my... I can imagine. Okay, Brian, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I've been trying to tell you I got it covered. I figured out what happened. Yeah. Okay. And now that we've all had that interesting and fun beginning, let's watch a video.
Why does Betsy DeVos' look at Title IX and Dear Colleague have feminist panties in such a bunch? And what does this mean?
Why does Betsy DeVos' look at Title IX and Dear Colleague have feminist panties in such a bunch? And what does this mean to the men's rights movement? We've discussed numerous points on men's issues throughout our time at Honey Badger Radio. Much of our activity has been necessarily focused on naming, defining, and unpacking the problems we exist to address. And that is still needed. However, we now also have a chance to look at something else. We have a next step to take. What's the real reason why feminists have so harshly attacked Betsy DeVos? She described how Title IX policy that codifies the 2011 Dear Colleague letter into law has negatively impacted both sexes. Why would anyone object to examining the causes of that harm and coming up with reforms that would prevent it from continuing to happen? While the grassroots may be getting led to believe that attacking Betsy is a way of protecting victims of sexual violence, feminist organizations are really just defending their political power and the meal tickets it provides them. Organized feminism's irons in this fire aren't just victims of sexual violence. They're not even just focused on the feminist-led campus initiatives that capitalize on this issue to create jobs for gender studies majors. The end goal is to establish standards in university policy and then use those to push for abandonment of due process standards in criminal court. Why? Because while feminist-led initiatives on university campuses create some gender studies jobs, The court system is a veritable gold mine for them, with organizations, lobbying initiatives, social advocacy, and accuser services all existing to capitalize on that system. To do that, they need to get pesky obstacles like the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, the right to face and question one's accuser in court, and the right to present exculpatory evidence out of the way. And slipping a pseudo-justice system of their own design onto university campuses is the perfect foot in the door. The practical application of Dear Colleague on university campuses could, if left in place, acclimate students to institutionalized systematic dismissal of civil rights. The process, whether intentionally or as a side effect, is designed to break down students' perception of and belief in the importance of those rights. From the process, students are apt to learn to accept the accused being considered guilty until proven innocent, subject to investigation and trial, with legal consequences but without legal assistance, subject to sanction prior to any outcome of the hearing, deprived of the right to question his accuser, deprived of the right to present evidence in his defense, and then subject to double jeopardy, should he prevail despite those handicaps. Should enough time go by with these standards in place, and publicly accepted on university campuses, we would see a generation or two of individuals who would view them as normal and would not understand why they shouldn't also be applied in criminal court. The federal mandate behind the university system, combined with its use by students instead of the criminal justice system or in response to not getting what they want from the criminal justice system, makes it a substitute for that system. The federal government has no business mandating that any private institution penalize any citizen for a criminal offense that has not been proved in a criminal court to have occurred, and its act of doing so can only be reasonably understood as an effort to provide accusers with an alternate system when they don't think they'll get the result they want from the justice system. In other words, a replacement. Providing students with such a replacement would lay the groundwork for expanding the university system's anti-due process standards into the criminal court system. Don't think it can happen? It has already started in terms of what evidence can be presented by the defense in sexual violence cases. We have seen the criminal standard pushed from against the victim's will ever closer to a Simon Didn't Say version of without the accuser's consent. A man's good faith belief, based on the accuser's active participation in a sex act, that she was a willing participant, cannot be counted on to legally exonerate him of the crime of forcing unwanted sex on her. We've seen the presumption of accuser-victim status used to paint the accused as guilty until proven innocent. We've seen the right to present exculpatory evidence denied if that evidence is part of the accuser's prior sexual history, such that if an accuser uses the claim, "I would never do that," to argue that an act was non-consensual, the accused must obtain a judge's permission to submit any past behavioral evidence proving that statement to be untrue. We've seen courts go from treating the testimony of both parties equally in he said, she said cases to giving the accuser's claims more weight, another way of presuming guilt. These infringements on due process took place as a result of years of agitation and lobbying by feminist groups. The university mock justice system is just a shortcut for the same types of attacks. Betsy DeVos has received much praise from the men's rights movement and taken a lot of flack from feminists for having the audacity to admit that due process is an inalienable, indispensable human right. For us, it's a victory in and of itself. We just had a public official acknowledge two very important things. First, that the falsely accused are victims of wrongdoing, and second, that government policy must not mandate institutional infringement on a civil right. I cannot stress enough that this is a great thing. We have a government official acknowledging that government policy is hurting people, and by people, she doesn't just mean women. What does that mean for us? It means we have an administration that is, at least in part, willing to acknowledge the ways in which dysfunctional government policy harms not just women, but also men. It means we have an opportunity to bring our side of this particular issue to the table. It means there is a strong possibility that we can see a reversal on the current trend of using policy and educational institutions to establish an attack on a civil right before that attack can result in acceptance of greater infringement. It could be the first baby step toward reform that would restore vital due process protections in criminal court. But before that, it gives us the opportunity to establish due process protections for university students accused of misconduct. So, what do we do? We have to do at least some of what feminists do. As I have said before, DeVos needs to continue to hear from activists dedicated to the preservation of due process rights throughout her decision-making process. But we need to do another thing feminists do in order to prevent the importance of those communications from being obscured by the fact that they come from men's rights supporters. The men's rights movement needs to be visible. We have to go a step further than feminists, however, and do it without being ridiculous. We've previously mentioned stickering and postering as ways to put these issues under more public consideration, along with hosting showings of the Red Pill movie, even if you think feminists will try to stop you. But there's another thing we can do, and those Red Pill showings rely on it. Men's human rights activists need to organize, at least to the degree that Gamergate supporters did. Gamergate didn't start lofty foundations or clubs with regular meetings or bylaws and officers, but we did organize campaigns to communicate our policy reform demands, and we did hold meetups in various locations. That has been international and is ongoing, and you do not have to be the administrative type to do it, because Gamergate has no leader. Men's human rights activists can organize similar campaigns and hold similar meetups. Meetups could even be done in conjunction with hosting showings of the Red Pill documentary. The International Men's Issues Conference has become an annual thing too, and it should remain so. We can make it so by attending, by bringing our reasons for involvement with the movement with us, some by speaking, some by representing groups and initiatives there, or, if we can do nothing else, by financially supporting it through donations, by spreading the word about it through social media prior to the event so others know it's available to attend, and by listening and learning at the event, or from the video footage of the event, and then sharing that knowledge. Why do we need to do that? We have to do it because as long as the movement remains mostly invisible, it will remain easy to use exposure as a threat, and invisibility as an excuse for dismissal. The more noticeable we are, and the more it can be seen that we're not few and far between, the more obvious it will become that consideration for men's human rights is no less normal than any other human rights consideration, until it is understood that it is ridiculous for description of human rights protections to ever include, except for men. So, yes, keep contacting Betsy DeVos, President Trump, and your federal and state legislators about this particular issue, but don't let that be the only thing you do. Put the issues up in public places via stickering and postering. Write letters to the editor of local publications. Comment on news articles online. Keep networking with other MRAs. Most of all, if at all possible, get up, go out, and meet with like-minded people. Go to men's issues events. If you find that there's not a lot of opportunity in your area to do that, that's your cue to host. The more of us who are willing and able to step into the breach, the harder it will become to silence the movement and slip things like Dear Colleague's massive attack on due process rights under the radar. And this is my cue to shill a couple of things. First, I am hosting a meetup on September 23rd and 24th. Since I mentioned meetups in things that we ought to be doing, I thought I'd better mention that one. Anyone can attend, including MRAs, Gamergate supporters, anti-censorship advocates, basically anyone we've reached through one of the issues that we cover on Honey Badger Radio. The details are at feedthebadger.com. I'm also gauging interest in a Red Pill showing. I definitely won't be able to do it before December, and it'll most likely be in Dayton or Cincinnati. So anybody that's connected to me on Twitter, let me know what you think. Anybody that's connected to me on Skype or in Discord, let me know what you think. Second, if you haven't signed up for MHRA Connect yet, why the hell not? Get on over to mhraconnect.com and create a profile, you lazy bums. Don't make me keep badgering you. And with that, welcome to Badger Talk 8. Dear colleague, we need to talk. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, conspiring with the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, the beautiful mind of Anna Cherry, and that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, to, as authoritarian anti-due process advocate, or should we say due process opponent, Joe Biden says, change the culture. Into the breach. One email, phone call, poster, sticker, letter to the editor, social media post, comment, meetup, or conference at a time. So, Badgers, are you breach body ready? I can see that you're trying to talk, Doge, but I cannot hear you. Hold on a second, and I will figure out why the hell.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay. I don't
That
know
was
why
very...
that was like that.
It
I was
wasn't
just
at
saying
my
that
end.
I wanted to add to the shill by saying that tomorrow we're going to be doing another fundraising stream, and so for the mixed up meetup, and I'm going to be taking a big hit here because I'm going to be reading. I'm going to be reading What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's her book where she basically blames everybody else but herself for losing the election. So I'm going to be getting the Kindle version and reading it on stream, and we can have a laugh at that. So there it is. There it is. Another way for me to shorten my already dwindling lifespan is by reading this book. So.
Hillary Clinton's rundown, novel-length rundown of why women in the United States are not ready for the responsibility of the office of presidency yet. It's not whether we're ready for a female president. It's whether women in the United States who want to be president or even in any other political office, whether they're up to that responsibility, whether they have the degree of accountability, whether they're adult enough to be president. And just by writing that book, Hillary Clinton shows that at least one woman in the United States is not. That's all I can say about that. But on
the topic, I just wanted to tell you guys I'm doing that tomorrow. So
yeah, I will be there, and it's going to be a great time. A great time will be had by all, and we'll rag on Hillary, because Lord knows she's been on the rag long enough. But in any case, the first thing I wanted to point out was regarding Betsy DeVos, and she has received a ton of flack, and they're going to continue to push. They're going to push her as hard as they can, as long as they can. They're going to push the rest of the administration. There are organizations that are dedicating themselves to this. So there is an organized effort opposing the reestablishment of due process rights, the confirmation of your right as a potentially accused person, your right to know what you're accused of, your right to face your accuser in a fair hearing, to question your accuser in a fair hearing, to present exculpatory evidence, to have the same representation as your accuser, and to not be subject to double jeopardy. Currently, under the law in universities, if somebody makes an accusation against a student and there's a hearing and the accuser doesn't get the result that she wanted, she can appeal, meaning the accused has to go through a second trial for the same offense. In the court system, that is against the law. You cannot do that. You cannot retry somebody for the same offense after they have been tried and acquitted. So that's a huge change. There's already been attacks on the ability to admit exculpatory evidence, and there's already been attacks on what you can ask your accuser in court if you're accused of a sex crime or you're accused of domestic abuse. But it's a new thing. This university system rule that subjects the accused to double jeopardy is a new thing. That basically means that once you're proven innocent, you can still be tried again, and it can be done in a different way. and they can try to prove you guilty the second time, or at least get a guilty finding. So, like I said, the stuff that we need to do, this is not just a minor thing. What we're pushing for and what we're fighting for is not just keeping that out of universities. It's keeping them from arguing that, hey, it works in universities, let's put it in the court system.
Well, I mean, it seems plainly obvious that this sort of thing shouldn't be allowed. If it's not allowed outside of universities, I really don't understand why it's allowed in universities. So I'm glad that somebody's finally standing up against this and speaking out against it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through her Twitter to see if there's anything going on recently. It looks like she's visiting a lot of schools and stuff, but why? Okay, for people who might be watching that may not know, Hannah, what do feminists get out of stopping her from doing this, from this investigation?
Well, first of all, there is a very large network of jobs at stake here. And it's not like they're going to get entirely rid of, all of the various on-campus initiatives they have because Betsy DeVos succeeds. Betsy DeVos succeeds in restoring due process on university campuses. There will still be all of the teach guys not to rape training that they've already instituted. That's not going to go away, even if we succeed at convincing our politicians to not abandon the importance of due process rights. But there are other things that are at stake here as well. For one thing, one of the things that the Violence Against Women Act did that this may mirror on university campuses is it created a paid job for an individual working with domestic violence victims advocacy agencies who would go into a courtroom with an accuser, and basically stiff-arm the court in terms of things like if the accuser commits perjury, the advocate will fight to prevent the court from perjury charges, from filing perjury charges against the accuser. The advocate's basically there to remind the court that the accuser is presumed traumatized and should have special accommodations. I've seen these advocates in the 7 Years in Hell case. There was one point in which those of us who were sitting on the side of the courtroom opposite the accuser and her entourage, and when I say entourage, she sometimes came in with several people. So the accuser and her entourage are sitting there. We're sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom. We're there in support of the accused, and the bailiff comes over with an accusation that we are staring at the accuser's back and she can feel it. And we must face away from her so that we are not accused of intimidating her, or we will be ejected from the courtroom. And this was actually stated in all seriousness. Here we were, simply watching the proceedings. We're sitting together on a bench. We have our heads, a lot of us, together. We're not whispering loudly, but we're, mentioning things that are going on to each other. We're keeping eye contact with the accused because he's the victim in this situation. And along comes the accuser with, I got to get rid of this guy's support. Here's how I'm going to do it. And of course, the advocate, that's what the advocate did. And that's it. Like I said, that's a paid position. And if they've got this system set up and the accusers are allowed to bring an advocate with them into the hearing, that's going to be the next step, is that they're going to seek funding for paid advocates for these accusers. They're already dealing with that in the legal system. It would not be a very far cry for them to ask for the same thing in the court system for schools. Now, the other thing is setting up this system in a university level, and they've already pushed to expand it to high schools. Setting that up, like I said in the video, it acclimates the students to tolerate this. So you get so many students go through high school and college with this as their norm. Once they are of voting age, you start pushing. Well, accusers in the real world don't have the concessions that you have in college. You can't get a fair hearing as an accuser in the real world. We need to eliminate what these people are calling due process. That's not due process. The accuser deserves due process, not the accused. And that gives them the ability to push for the same standards to be set up in federal courts, in state courts, in municipal courts. And the next thing you know, anybody accused of intimate partner and sexual violence is restricted from deposing their accuser, from shoot, I can't think of what it's called when your lawyer asks questions after the witness has already
cross-examination.
Yeah, to cross-examine. Yeah, you cross-examine. You won't be able to cross-examine. You won't be able to. It won't just be that you can't ask questions about her past sexual history. You won't be able to ask questions at all, especially questions that demonstrate that the individual is contradicting herself. Like in one case that I witnessed, where the individual, now it doesn't matter what the accusation is at this point, okay, and it
the Duke lacrosse case had that too.
Yeah, you don't even have to understand the law to understand what I'm going to say here. The accuser said that the accused did one thing to her with one hand that was a sustained activity, then did another thing to her with his other hand that was also a sustained activity, then did another thing to her with his other hand. You already see the problem, right?
So he's the overfiend, is what you're saying.
Yeah, she was molested by Zapod Beeplebrox. Except for they went after this guy from Rhode Island that was in Ohio, and he hadn't actually done the thing that he was accused of, and he was railroaded, and it took a few years to get through that. It actually took exposing some very ridiculous behavior by the prosecutor and the judge in his case, and publicly exposing it, and ridiculing the court on a Voice for Men's website before they finally conceded that, hey, you know, we really screwed this guy over. We can make him at least a deal. And that's basically, they ended up having to work something out simply because the court had ruled badly in so many instances that they were running out of things that they could do. But yeah, so that's the situation. They get jobs, they get more programs that they can introduce, they get the ability to introduce more educational programs, and all of this stuff will create jobs for gender studies majors. They get political power, they get social power, and their preferred government, that being the authoritarian end of the progressive government, gets the power to railroad anybody in the long run by making an accusation and then denying them due process. No, you can't submit evidence that you were not committing treason against the state. You'll embarrass the state. You don't have the right to do that. Done.
Just the whole thing around this frustrates me on a whole another level. And I mean, you're absolutely right where you're talking about getting more jobs for a particular subsection of people. And that really kind of feeds into the problem where the pervasive idea of patriarchy as something above you that presses down on you and excludes all women, and then women being victims, it completely does not recognize the subtle power of women. Like you were saying, she had an entourage. He had nothing. She has an entire system backing her up on a college end. There's everybody from every angle saying, well, if you're not believed, it's because these people are bad against you, and these people are not doing their job, and we need more. At what point do we stop and look at how much more we have piled into the female corner, to where they're standing on a huge mountain where they are on the level of the patriarchy that they think is oppressing them, while the men are down there, nobody's helping them, nobody's coming to their aid, everybody thinks that they're the bad guy, they have no fucking support system, but yet still somehow they're the bad guy. But it's not men, it's patriarchy. It's I had a talk on a podcast with people who are feminists, and it's just, I don't know how to break through this idea of shaking them almost to the and churning their head to see all of the support that everybody, themselves included, is giving to women all the time. And anytime a male issue is raised, they're like, oh yeah, those poor men. I don't understand how we could be so blind, and it's almost insulting to the subtle, softer power of women that allows to manipulate from behind the shadows in a certain way. And I mean that in a bad way, but sometimes it is. But it's almost like we keep only looking at the taxi driver and never, or the chauffeur, and never looking at the movie star in the back seat, never looking at the person who is telling the taxi driver where to go. Over and over and over, we make the simple mistake of ignoring the person who is actually giving the direction that we should be going in, the direction that everything should be going in. And we only see the person who is acting it out. We only see the aggressor, the active person, but we never, ever, ever look to see who might be driving them. And that sort of disrespect to the subtle power of femininity is what feminists are themselves perpetuating at this point. And I just want for everyone to open their eyes, if they possibly could, and look at the fact that we are heaping support upon women. And anytime a male issue comes up, it's laughed at. What does that tell you? Who is really in fucking power? For fuck's sake.
But they can't open their eyes, because if they look at you, then, you'll feel their stare gazing upon you, and then you'll have to tell them to turn around.
You'll be victimized again, and then you'll tell them what to do, because you're the victim, because that's what victims do. They tell people what to fucking do.
Yeah.
God.
I wanted to ask a question. Oh, no, Prim, you go first. Go ahead.
Oh, all I was going to say was that I was going to joke that maybe they just want everybody to be blindfolded in the court, but then the discussion on eventually we won't even be able to cross-examine. Well,
look what happened to Mark Pearson, where he was accused of fingering a TV star. And this is in college campuses, and this isn't even in the United States. But think about the way the trial went. They couldn't reveal the identity of the woman. In the courtroom, she was behind a curtain, like she's like some kind of like feudal Japan emperor that you can't like put your eyes directly on, and all you could see was her hand, like that, according to Mark's account. So you couldn't even look at the witness. And that was supposed to be the plaintiff in this case, or the victim, as it were. And then even after everything was said and done, and after Mark Pearson was found innocent, there was a caveat that he could never mention the name of the person that accused him of this thing that he couldn't possibly have done, and was eventually found innocent of. Now, think about that as what could be considered to be the start of an acceptable outcome with these people, like in terms of how rape accusations should go.
Well,
imagine that everywhere.
Like, why not just save the money on court altogether? We can save a lot of time and money by just, straight up throwing the guy in jail. Why not? That's the next reasonable step, right?
Yeah. So Hannah, what kind of jobs are we talking about that might be lost? I'm curious about the kinds of jobs.
Well, first of all, the law also calls for training for staff at universities regarding how to handle these hearings. That kind of training is going to be done, of course, by gender studies majors. It's the same situation. It's like the Violence Against Women Act, but for colleges. So it's the same situation as the Violence Against Women Act. You've got the state is funding a group of gender studies majors to teach the people who will be running a justice system. And I hesitate to call it that. It's kind of hard to call it a justice system when there's not justice as the goal. But they'll be paid to train them to avoid due process. And then you also, like I said, have these advocates that will be funded in the long run, because this is a stepping stone towards that. Another thing, of course, is you're going to have universities that have to have, like, they've already got to have a Title IX coordinator. They're going to have to, in the long run, end up with an office that does nothing but handle this type of complaint. Just in the first couple of years since Dear Colleague, we've had all these news stories come out regarding these complaints. Never saw anything like that before, right? Not anything in the news about multitudes of sexual misconduct and harassment cases being brought on university campuses. And all of a sudden, now that there is a law that makes it easier for somebody to bring a false accusation with impunity and with the potential for punishing the person that they're accusing, now we have this explosion of accusations. Not one university would have been set up to have somebody to handle that, because it wasn't something that anybody would have predicted prior to Dear Colleague. The fact that it's happening now indicates that as the students become more and more comfortable pointing the finger over every little slight, real or imagined, and shouting, harassment and sexual misconduct, rape, whatever you want to accuse somebody of, they're going to overrun the Title IX coordinators. And the Title IX coordinator is going to have an assistant just to handle this. And that's probably not going to be a low-paying job either. And then on top of that, you have feminist organizations that will have to have a position to advocate for more of this. There's always going to be a focus on this from organizations like the National Organization for Women, that they're going to have their lobbying jobs, they're going to have their advocacy, they're going to have their campaign management. So there's always going to be things for feminists to do in relation to this. And to be honest, some of those jobs won't disappear. The advocacy jobs, like the lobbying type things, not only will those not disappear if we make any headway, they'll double down. But there's going to be a lot of money pumped into this. There's been a lot of money pumped into the Violence Against Women Act. There's going to be a lot of money pumped into this, and it's going to be the same thing. So there will be, in addition to the advocates, in addition to the education, so-called education brainwashing initiatives, or trainers basically, there will also be public education, and that's also brainwashing. They'll have initiatives, not just regarding, the whole don't harass, don't rape, don't do this, don't do that, don't poo on the carpet. Just because you're old enough to know better doesn't mean we want to assume that you know better. They'll have initiatives to teach the students that this is the way things are now. If you're offended by somebody, you've been harassed, and you should point the finger and file a complaint. And these are all things that make money for individuals, and they justify, that's in quotes, you can't see them because, no video, but they justify further continuation, basically, of gender studies as a course of study of the interdisciplinary studies department. So these people are basically looking for ways to justify their own jobs, what they do, and the advantage they take of the system, and their attacks on men, and so on. And as I said before, there's also the issue of political power and the ability to use an authoritarian system to silence dissenters, to label any questioning of law and policy treason or some other type of illegal activity against the state, and start jailing people or fining people or otherwise taking action that would silence us. So,
Well, I was just going to mention they've already kind of started doubling down, even just in the face of her possibly talking about getting rid of this Title IX thing. Like, I saw somebody on Twitter the other day say, some fellow say, I'm not saying that I'm advocating for it, but I would be okay if Betsy DeVos got sexually assaulted or something like that. And it's like, why do people feel that this is okay to say? What the hell is wrong with you? Clearly, rape is a terrible thing, except when you want it against somebody that you don't like.
That's the thing about, I mean, just in my experience, that these people that get extremely rabid about this stuff, they wish the worst shit on people that they disagree with, and they don't even often really know everything involved. They just kind of dislike the person, either because they were told to, or because maybe that person does have some opinions that they find distasteful, even if they're not acting on those opinions, And I mean, I've seen it. If you're a woman and you're not a feminist, and feminists learn about it and you're vocal about it, they will come after you like you're not a person to them. They treat you like shit. Not in every case. I know there's plenty that are totally reasonable, but I'm talking about the rabid ones that are just like angry. It's awful. And I see it across the board with activists of all stripes. If you're gay and you're not, and you're, I guess you're not as far left as they are or whatever, they come after you, they attack your homosexuality. If you're black and you're not towing the line, the black activists, they come after you hardcore. I mean, it's just across the board like that. It's a weird tribal devotion to an idea that often leads to people attacking their people that they're supposed to be sticking up for.
Yeah, they even have slurs. They even have slurs for women, for blacks, for gays. They have slurs for those of us that go off the reservation. I'm sure pretty much any progressive stack group, anything that they would label a part of the progressive stack, when they're trying to use, in their name as advocacy. Any part of the progressive stack, they've probably got a slur. I know the one for women is gender traitor. I get called a gender traitor, and I've experienced that, that you should be raped thing from feminists and from other progressives. But to be honest, it's not the worst thing that can happen to you. They're wishing what they think is the worst thing on you, but they're not wishing the worst thing. If they were wishing the worst thing, they would say, oh, you should be burned at the stake. Oh, I hope you get encephalitis again. Well, you should die. Die today. Get run over by a car.
Part of the problem that I think we need to address is the fact that we have now moved rape, sort of sexual assault, away from something that is truly terrifying and can leave people with trauma, and does leave them with trauma constantly, where it's a violent rape, you're being held down, your life is in danger, you're being violated, you don't feel safe in your own home or in your own city or whatever. They're taking the egregiousness of what sexual assault is supposed to be, and now they have spread it around into this fine patina of, well, if somebody looks at you weird, that's sexual assault. If somebody gives you a drink that hasn't been closed and you kind of feel weird afterwards, you assume they drugged you and you've been sexually assaulted. If you have sex that you regret later, that's sexual assault. They know, I think, in some part of their minds, that it is actually not that fucking bad, because we've diluted the definition of rape so fucking much at this point. We actually, the false accusations, if we of course ignore all of the times that false accusations have happened and they have ruined men's lives, that gets routinely ignored. But that also doesn't point out the fact that they're taking legitimacy away from actual victims, and they're taking legitimacy away from this act. And now, not only has the definition been diluted, but the person who's a rapist, it's like you said, Hannah, don't poop on the couch. Well, yeah, you know what? People who are rapists, true, actual, violent rapists, they're sociopaths, they're psychopaths. They're not regular people who just don't know any better. That's a fucking lie and bullshit thing that has arisen because of our dilution of definition of sexual assault. There needs to be either a completely different category for it or something else. We do not need to keep lumping in all of these other things that are, no worse than stubbing your toe with something that actually fucking affects people's lives and actually leaves them traumatized. And I'm really frustrated about the fact that I think on some level there is some subconscious understanding of feminists and male feminists, etc., where they know that it's not the worst thing that can happen to you. Even obviously, violent rape isn't as bad as murder, but even so, the light sort of touchy, they looked at me weird, they touched me weird, I was assaulted because they stared, that shit needs to go, period.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, looks like we're starting to. There's a road that I'm seeing, a path to, some way out of this, or at least a beginning of that, with this very thing that we're discussing. So, I am optimistic but cautious.
And I would point out, now that we do have, like I said in the video, we have a foot in the door here. We have the opportunity right now to remind an existing administration that due process is important. Not just via the words due process, but write to this administration, write to your congressman, write to the president, write to Betsy DeVos, and point out the importance of the ability to submit all of the evidence. Why all of the evidence is important. Why it's important that the accused should have the ability to confront the accuser and look for holes in the accuser's story. Because justice is not conviction, and it's not acquittal. It is a pursuit of the truth of a given matter, so that when you act on your conclusions regarding that matter, and you act according to your conclusions, you are not committing an injustice by your actions. That is what justice is. It has nothing to do with who gets convicted and who gets acquitted, who wins and who loses. It has to do with whether or not, at the end of the hearing, at the end of the investigation and the hearing, the truth has been outed. And that has been what gets acted on by the authority figure. And if it's not true, if the authority is acting on an untruth, that is an injustice. And that needs to be gotten across to the authorities all across the board. That needs to be gotten across to the public. That needs to be on stickers. That needs to be on t-shirts. Not all as with the verbosity that I express everything, but the fact that you cannot have justice without truth needs to get out there.
Well said.
Yep, well said. Well, I guess so. So basically, what we're looking at is people who want to, have as much influence as possible, addicted to power, and also want to keep their jobs. And this is something that I've actually been saying for a while. Is what I've noticed about feminists and feminism is, for many of the people involved with the movement, they have chosen something that should have a goal of becoming obsolete, but it doesn't, because they realize that if it does become obsolete, then they no longer have a purpose, and they have to keep having a purpose. So they have to keep making up new things to essentially fight for, and make things up out of nowhere to fight against, so that they will always remain relevant forever. And this is why it's a never-ending climb with that kind of mentality.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely unsympathetic to people who feel like they need some kind of purpose to keep going on, but I will say to people, maybe don't string your purpose along, fighting some invisible thing that you think is in existence. Maybe just
you can do that if you like well, let me use what I think, for example. What I do here at HBR, I want to get to the point where the topic of men's rights becomes obsolete. That should be the goal of any human rights movement, to basically become obsolete, because you've accomplished all of your goals. And if I ever do, then I will have to find something else to do. But fortunately for me, I'm not stupid, and I have some talents and some skills that I can put to use somewhere else. And I'm willing to go and do that when the time comes.
Definitely
go do something else. But I think that in the case with a lot of the people that are involved in this movement, they've invested too much, or they've committed too much, or maybe they're not good at much else. And so this is what they do. I mean, especially people who are professional lobbyists, political figures and stuff like that. They literally don't have to be good at anything except getting into office. So, you know, it's this is basically like the reasoning behind staying relevant forever. Especially if you can become a professor and then get tenure, then you're basically set, and then you can do whatever you want. And so what happens when you know, this feminist professors become they get tenure and they basically can't be fired, okay, unless they commit some terrible crime or something. Well, they end up going and writing, you know, these feminist papers about I don't know, black anality and like fucking like the ways in which cheese doodles are sexist and phallic, and then they get them peer reviewed by all their friends who of course all just automatically co-sign on it, and it goes in, and these papers are there are countless papers like this. Nobody reads them, but it doesn't matter because these people are just doing this to maintain their career. And of course, if I'm not saying that Betsy DeVos is coming for feminist jobs. Obviously, this is not what's actually happening, but it could become potentially a consequence of what happens. And I think that if like gender studies and women's studies professors or people who are hoping to get tenure, if they do start to lose their jobs or if they become less relevant, they will blame her, and we'll have to fight that on a principle level. It's not about defending Betsy DeVos per se, but rather it's about defending the reason why this happened and why these people probably don't deserve the jobs they have. You know?
Well, and there's also a mentality that goes along with this. And I'm not saying that this is everyone involved, but it does exist within the feminist movement. And it is one of the driving forces. And it's not just a bigotry against men. There's a bit of crazy sauce in there. And one of the ways I discovered it was I wrote a blog post in response to the 7 Years in Hell case. When I initially started writing about it, one of the things I screwed up was, you know, I was very upset about what happened to my friend. And I wrote with my heart instead of my head. And when the vexatious litigant herself found the posts, she lost her shit, and she contacted the organization that had been helping her, and they flamed it, got it taken down. And the idea was you can't tell his side of the story at all. So to make it happen, she outed herself in the comments by giving her real name, and then accused me of doxing her because she gave her real name in the comments under a post that she didn't have to comment on. And on top of that, you know, she basically said, you can't write about this. I'm the victim. You can only write about me being the victim. And that was backed by Artemis House of Dayton, Ohio, in their flaming. And actually, they had supporters who came in, and one of them was one of the people that has told me, you should get raped so you'd know what it's like. Guy didn't know anything about me, and it was a guy. Didn't know anything about me, didn't know my life history, didn't even know my real name. And he said that.
I mean, you shouldn't have to know anything about anybody to realize that that's a shitty thing to say.
Right, but you come from a mentality, a belief, that 1 in 4 women have been, and you say it to a random woman. Aren't you taking a chance, a 25% chance, that you're saying that to somebody that already has been? You know, so then I write a whole new set of things, basically just describing the behavior, sort of a warning, including an article on what to do if somebody files a frivolous restraining order against you. One day I decided to look at the searches that had led to it, because it's the most viewed post on my little piece of crap blog. And I started reading them, and I'm just like, holy crap, how the hell are people actually searching stuff like this? I have, and I wrote another post describing, you know, what to do if somebody who has a restraining order against you contacts you. Because there were numerous posts, numerous searches. Can I contact someone I have a restraining order against if we have kids together? Can I get penalized for contacting someone I have a restraining order against? If you, the letter U, have an injunction on someone and you talk to them, what happens to you? What happens if you talk to someone you have a restraining order against? What can happen if he talk to my family after restraint order? Can I get someone arrested if I go where he is and I have a restraining order? If I have a restraining order and he is where I go but leaves, is it still a violation? And it goes on like that. Can I use a restraining order to stop him for going for custody? Compensation for restraining order. Does my restraining order stop his visitation? And then we have, I have a restraining order, but I still love him. Can I still see someone I have an injunction against? Have a restraining order against my ex. What happens if I let him in? If I have a restraining order, can I make him talk to me? Like, and it gets more, do I have to prove he violated a no contact order to get him arrested? Can judges tell? Can judges tell if you're sick lying about a restraining order? And it gets worse from there. Like, these are people...
And people pretend like women can't be duplicitous.
Yeah. Can people be arrested for entrapment was one of the ways somebody found my post about frivolous restraining orders. No, I ended up answering that one. You know, entrapment is when the cops trick you into committing a crime that you weren't going to commit and then arrest you for it. That's entrapment. When a person who is not a cop does it, it's not considered illegal by the same terms. It's just, it makes you an absolute fucking cunt. It's a fucking cunt move. It's not illegal. It's just really shitty. And yeah, nobody should be doing that. And shame on anybody who does. But that end is there. That mentality is there. That how can I exploit this? How can I use this for revenge or money or power? Even if it's just...
is bad tactics, only bad targets.
Yeah. And it's even just one person wanting power over another person. How can I exploit this for custody? How can I exploit this for property? That doesn't go away just because feminists are working with the university system now. Particularly not the vengeance end of it. I mean, there is... God, I can't think of the students' names. There was the Amherst case where the student who raped her roommate's boyfriend, by feminist standards, it was definitely and without question rape. He was blackout drunk. Now, I understand blackout doesn't mean unconscious. It means you don't remember what happened. So it's possible that he participated, but and he doesn't know, so we don't know. But she performed unsolicited oral on a blacked out drunk guy and then filed an accusation against him so much later that if he did remember what happened, he wouldn't have had a solid memory of it. When in fact, by her standards, by her university standards, he would have been the victim, and he had no recourse because she filed first and she was female. So it is being exploited. She didn't want to feel like the bad guy in basically persuading her roommate's boyfriend to cheat with her. And she didn't want to get accused of being the other woman, so she accused him of being a rapist. That's what we're looking at. So, Brian, did you...
Oh, yeah. No, I was just agreeing with you, that's all. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. I can definitely hear you.
Okay.
You cut out for a sec.
Oh, that's weird.
Here we have in the chat, can you replace all the avatars with the one in the right corner? That would be Anna's avatar, which is adorable. But then we wouldn't know who's supposed to be who. So basically that's it for me as far as this topic. And yeah, wait, Lord Croco Squirrel. Oh my God, you have the most awesome name, Lord Croco Squirrel. Lord Croco Squirrel says she texted her girlfriend during the act, complaining about how difficult it was just to get him up. Okay, no, the guy didn't participate then. That's definitely right. He must have been unconscious, not just blackout drunk, because there's no way. There's just no way. If she couldn't do that, then if he wasn't unconscious, he was at least incapacitated. And if that text had been admissible in the hearing, they would have figured that out. But they excluded those. And David Yeakel is pointing out whiskey dick is a thing, but it doesn't happen until you're pretty fucking drunk, I will say. It's not something where you're a little tipsy and all of a sudden your dick doesn't work. If that was happening to him, then he was incapacitated. And if that's a point where I would, especially if she was sober, I would call her a predator at that point. I know it's the same thing I would say about Amy Schumer. We get a lot of flack in the men's rights movement for our discussion on the Brock Turner case. And I've especially gotten a lot of flack for pointing out facts that people don't like to pay attention to, and for not accepting the story of the two witnesses over the story of the accused in that case. And the bottom line of that case was the guy was convicted for not stopping. The guy was convicted for, while nearly blackout drunk, not stopping because when his partner passed out. That's basically what he was convicted for, and the reason his sentence was short was because the judge believed him that he had gotten consent before he started. Amy Schumer bragged at a women's event about having had bad sex, the way she described it, with a guy who was so drunk he couldn't see straight, didn't realize he stank to high heaven, and couldn't stay awake while he was having sex with her. So, when the guy is passing out drunk, it's no big deal. When the guy is passing out drunk, apparently, that's not the same. When the guy is passing out drunk, he's still responsible for her experience. Only when the girl is passing out drunk is it a problem.
Guys have agency, you know?
Yeah. So it's either one way or the other. And this is what we're dealing with in these university systems. Over and over again, there's been cases like this. You know, now the Amy Schumer case, that there's never been anything come out of that. She bragged about that publicly. Nobody's ever prosecuted. You know, nothing's ever come of it. But, and it happened on a university campus. You know, or at least it happened between university students. But nothing's been done. Only the Brock Turner case happened, you know, to make it to court and attract so much attention from feminists that people showed up in his neighborhood after he was released. And by the way, that's also in the Dayton area. So they showed up in the Dayton area with guns that could shoot through brick and mortar in a residential neighborhood full of people with kids, and patrolled outside of his house after he got home, which this was apparently reasonable behavior for these folks. So yeah, this is what we're basically dealing with, and what we basically have to do, what we've got to do, is contact your legislators, contact your administrators at the state and federal level, contact media, comment on articles, keep putting the word out. Remember that due process is vital. There cannot be justice without truth.
Vital for everybody, not just for women, mind you.
No, and that's another thing. We talk about what the men's rights movement is for. There's a very basic reason we exist. And it's really not that complicated. If something is a human right, That's every human. All human beings should have the same consideration given to them for their human rights. That's it. There is not anything complicated about it. If something is an adult obligation, that's all human adults. Everybody that is competent to be considered an adult. Once you hit that level, you're an adult. You shouldn't be exempt from an obligation that is society-wide for adults. Not complicated. So if there's a law to protect a human right that has an obligation attached to it and carries penalties for violation of that right, the obligation applies to everybody, and the penalties apply to everybody. The protection should apply to everybody. Very simple. No reason to put gender in law. That's all we want. We're not asking for anything complicated. And we're not, asking for all kinds of funding for a bunch of initiatives to fix big social problems that only we can fix, and everybody else is wrong that has ideas that are not ideas that came from us. No, we just want equal human rights considerations, regardless of sex. We just want equal treatment when it comes to social and legal obligations that are imposed on adults in a given society, regardless of sex. That's it. No restrictions on men that are not also placed on women. Nothing special. And yet somehow...
Yep, pretty basic.
We're the devils. And this is, once again, this is why we got to be public. Does anybody have anything to add?
No.
I think that you summed it up pretty well there.
Yeah, I think that we basically ran through the case and talked about it.
Alrighty. Well, in that case, I am going to go ahead and take us on out. Good night, all. Thanks for listening. Get out there and comment and, poster, sticker,
share,
contact
subscribe,
your representatives.
Comment.
Yep. Share, subscribe. Share what we have to say. That'll be a big one. And come to the meetup. And again, sign up for MHRA Connect. It's worth it. Night all.